Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for your patience, but thank you for being here for those of you that are with us here in Burr Ridge. And I know we have a lot of you streaming online for today's event around the census and libraries. My name is Joe Philippek. I'm Director of Continuing Education and Consulting here at Rails. And we're very fortunate to have this panel of three individuals with us today to talk to us about, I think, first of all, why the census is important for our state, for our communities, and for our library. And of course, what is the way that we can engage and assist in getting our community to do that census, and why is that so important? So to help us sort of understand that and talk us through, we have three individuals here with us. We have Denise Raleigh of the Gail Borden Public Library in Elgin. We have Anita Banerjee from Forefront, the organization Forefront. And then we're very pleased to have with us Theresa, Illinois representative from, I believe, 2nd District, right? And so they're each going to take a turn just talking to us about these things. You will have an opportunity, of course, to ask questions. For those of you online, I encourage you to use the chat feature to send in any questions for any of these three individuals, and we'll get through as many questions as time permits. For those of us here in Burr Ridge, if any of you want to stick around afterwards, we'll open up for some more discussion if you want to share what you're doing with your colleagues at other libraries around the census. We'll have some time for that sort of networking and information sharing. We will record today's event, so if you have colleagues that couldn't be here, if you want to share that out, we'll have that opportunity as well. So I'm going to start talking now, and I'm going to turn it over to Theresa, who's just going to do a bit of an introduction before we move into some of the other content today. So, Theresa?
Okay. Do I have to start over?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. Okay, as I mentioned, I'm State Representative Theresa, represent a district in Chicago, the 2nd District, a lot of familiar neighborhoods, Chinatown, Bridgeport, Pilsen, McKinley Park, Brighton Park, and back of the yards. The district I represent is actually, one of those districts where there's a lot of concern about being able to count the population in this upcoming decennial census. There are categories of hard-to-count populations that include babies from 0 to 5 years old, immigrants, those who speak different languages other than English, low-income residents, folks who are not online, so they're on the other side of the digital divide. There are also populations in other parts of the state, for example, rural populations, a number of hard-to-count communities. And the reason, it's important to talk about these hard-to-count communities is that, in order to do a full and accurate count, we want to get as much of the population as possible. And in the past, we've learned that, there are populations that, for whatever reason are afraid or uninterested or, unaware of the importance of filling out the census form. And if there's a population or a census tract where, fewer than 73% fill out the census, they're considered a hard-to-count population. And, when we don't count as many people as there are in the state of Illinois, the state stands to lose billions of dollars in federal funding because there's a lot of funding that depends on the population count. So, funding that goes towards education, road building, social services, all kinds of things. And this is the number that gets assigned for the next 10 years. And so, whatever the number is for the Illinois population that gets counted during the census, that's the number that each year's funding is going to be based on. And so you don't just lose a year of federal funding, you would lose, a lot of money over the course of the 10 years before the next census. And in addition to funding, the state stands to lose at least one, possibly two congressional seats, because the number of congressional seats and seats, at other levels of government depend on the redistribution of the population. And so if there are fewer people who are counted, then the allocation of congressional, political representation also gets affected. So, the last thing we want is for fewer voices to be at the table, in terms of, making decisions in Congress. And, so we'd like to avoid losing more than one congressional seat. And so, this past legislative session, a number of us have really pushed for the state to allocate more money towards doing outreach during the census. And Governor Pritzker recently signed an executive order, and he worked with the legislature to appropriate $29 million devoted to census outreach. And so I think that this is the largest appropriation that any state has made on a per capita basis. So, Illinois is really serious about trying to count as many people as possible. And so the executive order, laid out a plan for how that money is going to be distributed. It designated a state agency, the Department of Human Services, to oversee the development of the notice of funding opportunity, so the RFP, and then the decision-making process as to how that money gets distributed, and who the fundees will be accountable to. So the process, as it stands now, is set to start pretty soon. And so by the end of the month, we should have the publication of this notice of funding opportunity with all the details for how organizations should apply. And then by October 1st, all of this money should be distributed out to the organizations that have put in the best applications and have the best plan for reaching out to their communities. And I think that there is an emphasis on granting the money to organizations that have a proven record for reaching out to their respective communities. So for example, in my area, there are quite a few immigrants, Asian and Latino. And so, organizations that have a track record and, has shown that they're able to reach out and talk to people, they're trusted representatives that, people will listen to, open their doors for, answer the phone and listen to their reasoning for why it's important to fill out the census document. So, this effort is set to take place, from the fall through early next year. So the Census Bureau, also has staff that are going to be assigned to do some of this outreach. They have a process as well. But the reason that we have to invest at the state level is because, compared to previous census processes, the federal government has budgeted less money to this process, and they've also changed the way that the census will be conducted. So there's an online component this time around, which can severely impact the hard to count communities. And then there's been a lot of fear around, the threat to put the citizenship question on the census. So we need trusted individuals, trusted organizations to reach out to our populations and let them know that, filling out the census form is really important, and that, the information won't be used against them. There won't be a citizenship question. The court decided that won't appear on the census. And so, the word still has to get out to people who, just have been hearing the rumors and, might be affected by the fears surrounding this topic. I just can't emphasize enough how important it is for libraries to get involved, because, you see people in the community every day, all kinds of folks come through, your library systems, your branches, and, you have the computers and the resources for folks who, might not have a computer at home. They can come into a library and get your assistance with filling out the form. You have an understanding of how critical it is that everyone participates in the census. And, it's really exciting to have this opportunity to, let more folks in the library profession, know that, your help is really, really important and valuable, and that, people trust you. Just this week I heard that NPR story about social workers being housed at libraries, and, it just hits home, how critical libraries are, and how integral they are in communities, and it's open and accessible to everyone. And so we really, really value your help in this process of reaching out to all members of our community across the state, and making sure that they're counted in the census. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, at this point, we will turn to Anita from Forefront. She's going to take us through some slides and some further information. So,
great.
All yours, Anita.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anita Banerjee. I'm going to stand up because I'm short and I've got a presentation, so I thought it'd be easier. So I am with an organization called Forefront. We are a statewide organization for grant makers and nonprofits. We were formerly known as the Donors Forum, so some of you may be familiar.
Hey, Anita, I'm sorry. We're going to have to, because our camera is like static right now, we'll have to ask you to
stand here?
Yeah. Or,
okay, that works.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so we have been around since the 1970s. We started out working with grant makers, and we've opened up to now working with nonprofits as well. And so wanted to walk you a little bit through what we've called the Democracy Initiative. It's a 3-year program focused on all things civic engagement. We've got the traditional civic engagement work that we do with voter registration, voter engagement. Particularly, we worked with the midterm elections, and we look to gear up for the presidential elections next year. But the second body of work within our Democracy Initiative is the census work. And as Representative Ma mentioned, right, this really takes all trusted messengers and individuals. It's an all hands on deck effort, real statewide work necessary. And so we've created 2 statewide tables. And I'll get more into that as I get further into my presentation, but kind of wanted to lay that out there for you, because sometimes it's easier when you can kind of picture what that looks like. So I'm going to reiterate some of what Representative Ma has already mentioned. The census is important for 3 main reasons, right? The first and foremost being our congressional representation. So based on the count that every state has, then we have the apportionment of our congressional representation. So since 1950, Illinois has lost 1 congressional seat in every decennial census. So we used to have 24 members in our delegation, and we are now down to 18. So this is what our current congressional map looks like. And as Representative Ma mentioned, we will likely lose one because of our track record of losing population within every decade and because we've lost one seat since the 1950s in every census cycle. So this is what the map could look like if we lose one seat. So very likely could come from the central and southernmost part of our state. But if we don't work together, if we don't make an effort to ensure that all of our various hard-to-count communities are accounted for, we could very well lose a second. And where could that second seat come from? Very likely could come from our greater Chicago area. And we know that we need our congressional representation so that everybody's voices across our state are lifted. So this map, this is a really great tool for those of you that want to geek out on census information. This is just one of the resources. Certainly the Census Bureau has their own mapping tool as well. But this is what many advocates across the country use. It's called the Hard to Count Mapping Tool. It's been created by the City University of New York. And you can literally get down by congressional district, by state elected official district, by county district, where these various pockets of red, as we call it, are. Red means that 73% or less reporting that occurred in the last decennial census. And this has been updated with some of the American Community Survey information, I want to say in the last couple of years. But really great resource. A story I like to tell is when Forefront got engaged in the census work in the summer of 2017, we realized that we really needed our congressional delegates to get on board with this. So we took, what you can do is you can literally print out a district map based off of the district you're looking at. And so I had a meeting with congressional leader, Representative Foster, and I printed out the map with the various pockets of red in his district. Took it to an in-district meeting, and he was like, Anita, I know Aurora is a big population of hard to count. And I said, yes, sir, certainly. But look, you've got pockets of red in Joliet. And it was a real aha moment for him, and he was like, what can I do? How can I get involved? And it really set the stage for him to be a leader in our Illinois congressional delegation and for the country on census outreach. He's now held 3 congressional community census briefings, including one with clergy leaders. And he's now also on the House caucus for census outreach. So the second reason why the census is so important is because of our federal dollars, right? You may not be using a number of social service programs, but someone in your family, your extended family, your community, your neighborhood may very well be using social services. And that is all predicated on a fair and accurate count. So there's a really great body of research from the George Washington University by Professor Andrew Reamer. And this shows you by state kind of how much money comes into your state based off of your census count. I say kind of because there's a couple of different iterations. This one, the one that we've been touting, is about $20 billion that comes into Illinois every year based off of our 2010 count for about 16 social service programs, the bigger social service programs. But what he did was he actually went a little bit deeper and realized that states receive even more for 55 social programs, so that we end up getting about almost $34 billion in federal dollars for social service programs. So I know that can get into the weeds a little bit, so what we like to do is refer you to this body of work, because you can then go in and look at what specific program might be important for you or your constituency, and be able to kind of look and be able to crunch those numbers. What I will say is this body of research will go even deeper and start looking at county data. That has been a real need for advocates across the country, and so that will be forthcoming, I want to say, this fall. So I would refer to this piece of research because it really kind of shows you how the numbers break down and why it's so important that we have a fair and accurate count, because if we don't, then these are resources that people will be missing out on. So what does this mean for an individual, right? Like we talk about $20 billion, we talk about $34 billion. Well, the research shows that it averages out to about $1,800 a person for 1 year. So that's $18,000 that a state is theoretically missing out on for just one person that goes unaccounted for. And that, when you break that down for Illinois, Cook County Commissioner Moore likes to use this number. It comes out to about $1,400 a person, roughly. And so that's $14,000 for one person that is not accounted for in the decade in Illinois. That's a lot of money. And so the third reason the census is so important, and this is the one that people don't always focus on, right, because we're so reactionary and we want to focus on the immediate, is that we need to have fair and accurate data so that we can plan for our future, right? How are we supposed to know where the new schools need to go, where the roads need to be built, infrastructure for small businesses, for there to be more railway systems between Wisconsin and Illinois? You know, all of this is predicated on census data, and we can't do that if we don't have all of our residents accounted for. So how does an undercount happen? Well, an undercount happens when you have what are called traditional hard-to-count populations, right? And when, as Representative Bob mentioned, when you think about that, you very well think immediately of communities of color, low-income communities, and immigrant communities. But what we know is that with the census going online for the first time, that rural communities are a hard-to-count community for the first time, right? That this is a community that doesn't necessarily have access to broadband, and if they do, we also know there's research out there that shows that they don't like to use their phones in the same manner that other communities and urban communities may do so. And so these are just some of the populations that are out there, but certainly there are more. The children 0 to 5 is the biggest hard-to-count population. There's a really great study out there by the Annie E. Casey Foundation that shows that 1 million children of that age range went unaccounted for in the 2010 census. That's a lot of people, right? And we've also been able to discern this past decade that the reason why a lot of children go unaccounted for is because families don't know. They're not educated to know that when you're filling out your form, it's for the entire household, right? It's not just for you or your spouse, it's for everybody that may be living there on April 1st. And so in many cases, if a newborn 2 days old is now living in your house, people don't necessarily know that, particularly in mixed status families, immigrant families, undocumented communities, low-income communities, right? And because the decennial census only happens once a decade, right? There's a lot of information that needs to be reshared. People need to be re-educated on it, or in some instances, they didn't know and they didn't fill out the form in the last decade. So it's really important that we have good ground game and strategies to reach out to these various communities. The renters are also a very big hard-to-count population, because what we know is there are a number of students that go away for school, and they need to be counted where they're going to school. So the Census Bureau says you should be counted where you are 9 months of the year. So if you're a student and you're going to school in Illinois, but your hometown is in Kentucky, your family needs to ensure that you get accounted for in Illinois. And because we don't necessarily have a lot of that information shared and in real time, sometimes there is not enough counting of people, or there's duplication, right? And although the Census Bureau is able to kind of figure out what those dupes are, if they're unaccounted for, it's much harder to try to get those in correct time. So the challenges to the 2020 census. I wanted to touch upon this because I think it's important to recognize that in any decennial census, there will be challenges, right? This is a huge undertaking for our country and truly is a hands-on-deck effort. But we also know that this is the first time in the census history that we're going online, and there's a very real digital divide in our country. So we need to be mindful of what and who are our trusted messengers. And so libraries very much play that community hub, that community role. And when you think about the digital divide, this is where many people can come to self-report. Funding. So as Representative Ma mentioned, funding at the national level for the Census Bureau for census outreach has been a bit abysmal this past decade, right? They have been operating at 2010 levels until about 2016 or 2017. They got a bump in their appropriation last fiscal year, and so that carried them a little bit. But it wasn't enough, and now we know that their advertising and their promotional materials for various hard-to-count populations will not come until the end of the year. So we really need our trusted community leaders and messengers to step up and help, because we need to ensure that people realize why it's important to count and how do you get counted in this particular census. And then, of course, there's the testing. For any question to be on the census form, there needs to be testing conducted. For the fact that they're going online for the first time, that process needs to be tested. All of that is based off of what are called end-to-end tests. And there are typically about 3 of them over the course of a couple of years ahead of a decennial census. And we only had 1 last year. And that was in probably one of the smallest states of our country, in Rhode Island last year, with a very small sampling of our population, which is not indicative of all of the populations that we have in our country. So knowing that that was a very small sampling also is not helpful, right, in being able to prepare for such a large endeavor. So the other point I want to mention is the leadership vacuum. So the director of the Census Bureau had resigned at the end of the summer of 2017, so end of June of 2017. And it wasn't until a year and a half later that Dr. Stephen Dillingham was appointed and put in place at the start of this year. And while he's been doing a fantastic job, he's been traveling the country, he's been very engaged and had the opportunity to meet with many of Forefront's advocates earlier this year, he has also indicated that this is a very big job and we really need our communities engaged to help us get a fair and accurate count. And then, of course, there's the legal issue, right? I would be remiss if I didn't mention the proposed citizenship question that took up a lot of time and energy, particularly for advocates, for the last year and a half. And now we know, right, that the question will not be on the form. But we also know that it takes time to heal from that that was a very emotionally charged issue, right? That there are communities that are still wondering, okay, if it's not on there, will there be a different way that that information will be shared or collected? And so we have to work even harder as a state to ensure that any misinformation or any disinformation is squelched, right? So that people have the accurate information so that they can self-report in real time. And that's just going to take time. So how do we get to this count, right? How do we ensure that we have a fair and accurate count for Illinois? That's where you all come in, right? We need our trusted messengers with effective messaging to be able to reach out to our vulnerable populations. And libraries are very much that trusted messenger. So I know that Denise will go more into the specifics and has done, she and Elgin have, in particular, have been a great model for our country in how Gail Borden library system has been able to do outreach work in 2010. And ahead of 2020, they've got some great strategies. But by and large, wanted to be able to share that in order for us to do this work, libraries really need to step up and be able to share with our communities, with our constituencies, that they have access to computers, to Wi-Fi, right? So that people can come in during that period of self-reporting, which will be from anywhere from March to the end of May, that they can come at a trusted space to be able to bring in their postcard with your individualized code to self-report. And that although there will not be people at the library that will be enforcing or forcing you to self-report, that this will be that safe place where you can do so. And that the other point is that the Census Bureau needs help. They need a number of people to be able to help out with this endeavor, particularly because we're going online. So there is an opportunity to partner with the Census Bureau to be able to have a job fair, to be able to help, have people from the Census Bureau at the library during, like, say, office hours, for people to understand what are those positions, how can you apply. Many of those positions are posted online. And I believe if you go to census.gov/jobs, you'll have the entire list of those positions that are out there all across the state. But that this is a really great opportunity for partnership. And then the other piece I want to mention is that these complete count committees, right? These are designated bodies of community leaders coming together all across the state. So in 2010, we had over 200 of these committees. And that was great because it showed the strength and the breadth of leadership that was willing to come out for the census. But no one group talked to each other, right? And we want to ensure through Illinois that there is more coordination. So Forefront really helps to bring people together, communities together. We help make sure that you're connected to the Regional Census Bureau any chance that we get, because we want to ensure that libraries, that other community leaders, that the unusual suspects are connected. And so this is, and I believe Denise is part of the Elgin Complete Count Committee, so she can go more into this. But the example is that libraries can also play a very important role on these local complete count committees. And that you can also put together events at the library, whether it's a general kind of gathering or it's for your hard to count populations, where you can bring in speakers like State Representative Ma to talk about why it's important to educate early and often, and how you get to those various populations that may need some education or re-education. So just really quickly wanted to talk about the Illinois work, right? We talk about how everybody can get involved, but want to be able to give some specific examples. So Forefront has been fortunate to have partnered with 2 national advocates in this space. So as I mentioned, we are an organization for grant makers and nonprofits. So on the grant making side, we work with a group called the Funders Committee for Civic Participation. Everything in the advocacy world is an acronym, so FCCP. They've got incredible information on their website. They've got a thing called All Things Census. It's a Funders Census Initiative, FCI. If you Google it, you will find fact sheets, you will find webinar recordings, you'll find slide decks of all kinds of information that you can take and customize. And then the other one is a leadership conference on civil and human rights. This group, Forefront, has been working with very closely for almost 2 years now, and they bring about anywhere between 20 and 30 states together on a regular basis, on a quarterly basis, to be able to talk about best practices, what's happening in California, what's happening in Pennsylvania. How do we do this work smarter, not harder? Because this isn't a competition. This is about everybody working together in concert. And so I've really been able to take that information, distill it down, and help bring it to Illinois in real time. So the way that Illinois is organizing is in 3 main ways, until DHS came into this picture. We had the Illinois Complete Count Commission, which is the first of its kind in the country. It was state statute created in 2017 by a number of our state legislators, because they realized that while we had these local count committees all across the country in 2010, these groups didn't work together. They didn't talk to each other. So we wanted to have a body that was kind of that central role that kind of was that connector and convener. So the commission has been in effect through the Secretary of State's office through March of last year, so March of 2018. State Representative Ma is one of those commission members. And there are 22 members on this commission, and their charge is to be that boots on the ground and help kind of look at the big picture and figure out how do we plug in, how do we ensure that people are getting the resources and information they need for a fair and accurate count. And now there are about 10 of these by state statute across the country, and 47 states, I want to say, have now created statewide complete count commissions. And then the other 2 are what I mentioned earlier, our Forefront statewide advocacy coalition and our Funders Collaborative. So our advocacy coalition came together in January of last year, and this was our effort to bring people from all various sectors within the nonprofit space and what Forefront likes to call the social impact space together, because we know that everybody counts, that this is a civil right, this is a human right, and we need to ensure that all of the leaders in the various pockets of this work come together. And that was a work in progress, right? Because it takes time to bring all of these communities together. But I would say that we fared pretty well. We have about 60 groups that are engaged. Not all of them at one time, but at different times, everyone kind of steps up. And this was an effort in trying to figure out how do we work together. And so we thought, let's take our hand and ask the Illinois General Assembly for a state appropriation. So we tested the waters last fiscal year, and we asked for $5 million. And while we didn't get $5 million, we did get $1.5 million. And that was a really great first effort that went to the Secretary of State's office. They did an RFP, and they selected 18 grantees. So now there are 18 organizations across the state that have engaged in census outreach work through the Secretary of State's office. But we also knew that 1.5 was not nearly enough for the work that needed to be done ahead of the Census 2020, and the fact that at that point, California came out and blew everyone out of the water and appropriated $100 million. Of course, that was over 3 years, but our coalition said, let's bring it. Let's ask for even more. So the summer of last year, we tried to figure out what would be the best way that we could make this happen. And we also knew that we needed to work with more people in the field because we certainly couldn't do this alone in asking for such a large appropriation in a new administration and a number of new state elected officials. So we decided to put it in bill format. So in January of this year, we worked with State Senator Iris Martinez to introduce Senate Bill 1408, and that was asking for $25 million for this outreach work. Why? Because the Leadership Conference had been working with New York to put together a fiscal paper that would show how much money does a state really need to do census outreach work, because this has never been done before. I think there were 3 states that had done a state census appropriation in 2010, and they were for relatively small amounts of money. Relative. Having said that, we knew that in order to ask for $25 million, we needed to have a study to help back up our ask. Meanwhile, we had another state representative in the House, State Representative Andre Topetti, who decided that he wanted to ask for more than $25 million, that wanted to take a page out of California's book. Why should we not ask for more, right? And so he introduced a bill for $33 million. And so all session long, we had these 2 competing bills, if you will, but in different chambers, but for the same goal in mind, right? For a large state census appropriation that would then be able to go out through a notice of funding opportunity for groups like yours, for groups all across the state to come together to work collaboratively with capacity dollars to do this work. And so we were very fortunate that the governor's administration and members of the Illinois General Assembly, like State Representative Ma, were able to understand, hear us, work with us, and appropriate, which is the largest annual per capita investment in the country. So, the Funders Collaborative. This was a pilot program that was put together in 2010 by the Joyce Foundation. There were 10 funders in Illinois that came together and realized that when you pool resources and you give capacity dollars to concentrated communities, that you can actually get an uptake in your census count. So every community that had received these dollars, I think there were like 26 of them across the state, but more in the greater Chicago area, that there was a 1% uptake. And a 1% uptake is a huge percentage, and they only engage in this work over a 6-month period. So we knew that if we made that investment early, and we asked grantees to do a 12-month program, that we could probably have an even larger bump in that census percentage count. And so Forefront decided to be the facilitator this time around. We've got 22 Illinois foundations at the table, and we raised $1.75 million. So our RFP went live earlier this year, and we fielded about 80 applications from the state, from across the state. We're able to grant 42 of those organizations, and we announced our grantee program in April at a census summit in Springfield. And so those folks have now also gotten boots on the ground, gotten engaged, and have started their outreach efforts. And so I would say that Illinois is really leading on a number of fronts, but this is where we could really use the expertise and the help from the library community, the library profession, to help us be even more concentrated in our outreach. So these are the 3 Illinois tables, as I mentioned. For more information about this, because I know I'm kind of getting into the weeds, reach out to me. I can certainly connect you to folks. I can make sure that you have information as you'd like. And so that's it from my end.
Okay, thank you, Anita. I will just share now a comment from one of our streamers who is today viewing the stream from their library, which is a rural library, and she described how, there's very little internet connectivity in her community, so she expects to be helping people at her library sort of navigate and be able to get online and do the census. So I suspect there are a lot of you watching who are maybe in that similar situation. And again, just another reason why this is important for libraries to engage and assist their community in. And that is a reminder for those of you streaming to send in any questions or comments, and when we're wrapping up in a little while, we'll get through as many of those as we can. And for those of you here in Burr Ridge, again, you'll have an opportunity if you have some questions for these three. Before we turn things over to Denise, it is my pleasure to introduce our executive director here at Rails, Deirdre Brennan, who's just going to say a few words kind of from the Rails perspective. So.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Joe. Yes, sir. Okay, hi everybody. Okay, Ryan's giving me the thumbs up. Yes, Denise asked me to say a few words, and I always do what Denise tells me, that's for sure. So you're laughing from Gail Borden, right? So no, in all seriousness, I'm so glad that you're all here today and that you are all here today for this important topic. I just want to say that for that $29 million that Representative Ma was talking about, we are Rails. We are looking into applying for some of that money. We've been talking to the state library about it. We just and getting information. Thank you, Representative, about what we need to do to be, eligible. And we haven't seen the announcement yet, but if we can, and it looks like we can get the grant written in time, what we would want to do is obviously partner. I mean, it's all resource sharing. Here we go with that again, right? It's all about that. As you were saying, Anita, all the partnerships and the working together that we can do, and we would want to partner with you guys to get the money out to you guys to do the work and to find out from you what it is that you need to do. You and all the other people who are involved in this around the state. So we'll see what eligibility requirements, if there's any geographic requirements, et cetera, but stay tuned on that, okay?
Thank you, Deirdre. So our final panelist today is Denise Raleigh, who, we'll see if I remember this, Division Chief for Public Relations and something else, right? Development at the Gail Borden Public Library in Elgin. They have done a lot of work around the census, and she's going to share some of that with you. So, Denise, your PowerPoint's ready?
Oh, thank you very much. And thank you, Dee, for saying, I think this, as I was speaking, if Rails enters this, I think this is a game changer for many libraries and for effectiveness of the census in Illinois, because I think libraries can play such a vital role in getting people counted. So thank you all for coming, and thanks for those people who are online. Thank you, Representative Ma. A few years ago, we had our first, it was a luncheon downtown. We added a advocacy event. We had 2 legislators who showed up. Theresa Ma was one of them. And it proves, I think, she doesn't just talk about libraries, she walks the walk. She's been to a number of library events. So pleased to see someone like you so close to the census that I think the libraries can play such a vital role for. But thank you just flat out for your support for libraries. And Anita for being here. She has been to our library, I think, twice at least. And what they have played a vital role in providing funding, but the information that they keep us updated on, all the Forefront, I am a Forefront grantee, is wonderful, because she's right now, she's a pipeline for best practices for what's already happening on the ground. So the information that she is in daily contact with and has is not kept close to her. She's a sharer, and she really is wonderful for the census. And so I thank you for being here as well. Thank you, Ashley Johnson and Catherine Savage, who might be watching online from Vernon Area Public Library, that have been really on top of this census issue since the start. Laura Espinoza from Gail Borden, that's over here. We are pleased to be part of this and be this day as well. So, and thank you again for everyone who's watching. Click here. How do we forward this? Okay, why is Gail Borden such a census advocate? This happened in 2010 for us. We led our effort. We were the head of our complete count committee back in 2010. I want to say we reached out to the census and said, let us be that. However, the story is much different than that. When I started working, and my boss and a number of administrators at Gail Borden in 2004, we thought, boy, we could really beef up our partnerships. So we started with exhibits to bring more people and to grow something larger and create more partnerships that we could all take advantage of and just to grow our impact in the community. Gail Borden has always been a fantastic library out there, but we really had an interest in growing partnerships. So we hosted some really wonderful exhibits. It did grow our partnerships. Grand Victoria Foundation, thank you very much, Grand Victoria folks, were very supportive in that endeavor. We did not have any money in operations for exhibits. However, we had some supporters in our community, and we still do. Years go by, these things do impact partnerships. We create this wonderful network. And of course, with libraries already being one of the most trusted organizations that are in any community, it put us in a really great place. And we were really happy to see this bloom. But in 2010, probably happened in 2009, our representative from Grand Victoria Foundation, who was part of the 2010 Funders Forum, said, you know, we really supported you in growing your exhibits, your partnerships. Now we would love for you to turn this around and use it for census. You know, you've created quite a network, and we've helped you create. And again, once this success starts, you know, we had a success, it started with exhibits, but it went into all manner of outreach, all kind of just wonderful services and programs we were able to offer to our community and still do. But she said, we really need you to be part of the 2010 census. And so we said, okay, we'll be in the census business. We received a small grant in 2010. And as you can see, this was some of our efforts in 2010. We moved the needle 9 percentage points, but that was really reaching out to our partners and making sure everybody was on the same page. And of course, what we did is we created new partnerships, because I'm going to show you some tools, and we had some of these tools or something like these tools in 2010 to figure out who we weren't already working with that we should be working with to accomplish what we needed to in 2010. So we had efforts. That's the world's largest census form there on the left. We tried to visual. This is a young lady who spoke Spanish, who was in our library entry rotunda greeting people who were coming into the libraries during the month of March in 2010. And really all she did was talk about the census in a very non-threatening way, but she was just saying, this is for your community. It was $1,250 that we estimated in 2010 that each person counted brought into our community. And billboards, we had census parties. Those are a lot of fun. They can be fun. These are the tools. If you're saying, how do I get started? How do I know what my community, what do I anticipate? Where do I think my hard to count communities are? And this is a Rome tool put out by the census. We think this is really, really wonderful because it will talk about a number of demographic characteristics that might cause that particular census tract to be undercounted. And as Anita and Theresa were talking about, it is about your status. How, do you speak English as a first language? Are you a renter? Your age? There's a whole bunch of statistics that the Census Bureau has put together and saying when these are all present, your chances of an undercount are like this. And this is I'm going to show you what another tool coming up, but this one is what they anticipate the problem to be in 2020. So this is really, really useful. And you can zoom in, zoom out. You can go down to the census block level. We find that really, really, really informative. This is another tool that you can use, and this goes down to those same areas, but this talks about what happened in 2010. What were the particular areas? How were they counted? So this just goes back in time, and of course we've all experienced growth or non-growth, but this goes back and you can take a look at what the count was. A particular little region that I've zoned in on shows that we've moved that from, I think that's 18 percentage points in that particular area of Elgin. Again, we moved it from 70% to 79% in 2010, and that is a library, and it was not a library alone, it's just libraries really utilizing networks we already have. We're already working with a lot of people, but everybody charging together and then growing that particular, like our school district gets $38 million of federal funding. We serve U46, but so some of these numbers are really massive. And again, because U46 will cover 3 library districts, will be hopefully what we generate through U46 will be helping all of those communities. So there, and again, library districts don't stop at this and this and this. So what you're doing and who you overlap with, I think you'll find that you'll be helping a number of areas. But this is another one to go back in time and see what it is, how you were counted then. There, and again, if you're looking, is there already a complete count committee here? So this is I believe Ashley said, you guys aren't listed on that. And I did contact the census, and they said, oh, where they were having problems with that, yes, you are not, and we're one of the older established complete count committees in Elgin, but many of the, so if there are some on there, it's some place to already start working with a complete count committee that's already in action. It is not updated, as we can tell, but it's a place to start to see if there's someone already doing the work in your community. And, okay, so you can work as, we co-chair our Complete Count Commission in Elgin, the library and the city. We are the co-chairs of our Complete Count work. So you can either, if something doesn't exist and you really would love to do some great partnership work that has an ROI, an unbelievable ROI for your community, this is one of those types of endeavors. However, if you want to lop onto or jump onto someone else's work, you're also can be one of the most effective partners they will have as a library. But this is the way we are set up. We have a number of leaders. We co-chair all of our subcommittee work. And as you can see, we work, these are just the beginning of some of the people that we are working with in Elgin. But we make sure, and we have messages, we will be developing messages, our media subcommittee, that can be tweaked for individual audiences. And our goal is to have the most trusted person for that audience deliver the message. Your most trusted friend telling you the census is okay, you need to fill it out, for the future of this community. And by the way, your information is safe. So we have faith-based, business, media communications, health, the schools, community and special populations. We also have a subcommittee chair for recruitment, and we have one for youth just to make sure they're getting involved because 2030 is coming as well, and this makes such a difference to these communities with the social services. And so we've involved everyone we can, and I'm going to move along and say how it is that we determine who needs to be in, and there's never too many, but there's people that you need to bring in if they're not already part of your partnerships. No. So what that would, and that would go back to your Rome. Again, we go with this, I'll go back here. We look at who we think is not going to be counted. We have statistics. We have, and again, people who already serve those populations, if they weren't involved beforehand, we actually will, we write them a few emails, then we will call them, then we will visit them. Again, we have not met with anyone who says, you know, I'm not going to help you with the census. We deal with very busy people like everyone else. However, when they understand the importance and what it means to social services, especially for our community, we have had no one who said, you know, I'm not going to help you with the census. Again, noting how busy everyone is, it's sometimes a delay in getting them on board, but most of the people, I think we've had over 90 people and organizations already join with us in this work. So this is just one of our committee meetings over here on the right. And the forms, I hope everyone got some, and I think we're going to make these available online. What we hand out at these meetings are these forms, and it's a census form to let us know what you can contribute where we're not going to need funding, or, you know, it's what population do you serve? You know, do you have a place for materials that we can, once we start rolling with our census materials, can we drop them off there? Do you have someone who is waiting in your waiting area that you would be able to talk about the census? Do you have a high visibility location where if we put a sign out front that a lot of people would see it? So we're just trying to maximize the connections of the people that are already in the room. So it's like, do you have a newsletter that you're going to run, that you can run our message in your newsletter? Do you have something regularly that comes out from your church where we could put a message in that? Do you want to speak on behalf of the census? What's your, you know, and what kind of audiences do you regularly work with? So we're really just trying to get a snapshot, and we have most of our people who are partnered in have already given us this information. So it allows us to look and see what are we missing, you know. And again, we were very lucky to have gotten a Forefront grant. We also have a Secretary of State grant, but and thank you to Dee for saying that Rails will be looking into this, but preparation was the key. You know, we had a visit from Grand Victoria Foundation representatives last year asking us whether we were ready to start working on the census. Well, that wasn't top of mind for me in 2018, but I said, yes, we're willing, but they knew the timelines for these grants. So we were able to take advantage of these opportunities to really impact our communities because we were ready. And so it's getting, you know, doing this work and understanding how it is that our libraries can contribute to the census effort, which ultimately brings needed funds, services, and representation into these our communities, is a fantastic. It's a fantastic way to contribute for our library to contribute to its community. And so the form is one thing. You can see our census website, which is run off our Gail Borden, is gailborden.info/census, and it has a lot of these materials as well as the ones that you're going to see on the handouts. Deciding on how to communicate was one, you know, we've got a lot of busy people, so we use our regular constant contact e-newsletter with a group, and people can sign up for that newsletter. When we were finished with our census work in 2010, we had 242 organizations and people receiving our regular updates. Because one thing that becomes very important, again, preparation, education, and you'll see the timeline that we handed out. Right now we're in that education phase, but you will come March of next year, you're going to be in the implementation phase. And one thing that we had in 2010, and I'm hopeful it will come in 2020, was regular updates on how your self-reporting counts were going in your different areas of your community. It was extremely helpful in letting people know, hey, thank you for all your work. Look where we are now. You know, we're at 72%. Hey, look, you know, thank you for all that work on the north side. We're at 75%. Boy, that downtown effort that we all just put in, look at now, we're at 79%. So getting those regular updates and also knowing how to allocate time and people. You know, everybody runs out of time and people. You know, they're the scarce resources that we have. But having that regular look at data was really helpful in saying, this is the block that we're having a difficult time with. So we actually had one of our Centro de Información had a person that was in 2010 was supported by the city, but we actually, that person moved around late in the counting in 2010 to the area most in need. And we thought it was really effective to do it that way. And the data is wonderful. So we're starting to work on our messaging right now. We have our first video of and you're going to see that this is a young mom and her children. And this is going to be the English version. We also have this in Spanish. So without further ado, this is one of our first lead-off videos.
My name is Carla and these are my 2 boys. We live in Elgin and we will make sure to get counted in the 2020 census. Most of my life I've lived in Elgin. I grew up in Elgin, I graduated from Elgin schools, I work in Elgin, I'm raising my family in Elgin. Elgin provides a space where I feel safe, where it brings diversity, where there's lots to do for my family. During those special times, my family and I get together to eat, to play, to listen to music and have a great time. We are getting counted so that people in Elgin will be cared for. The information that I provide to the census will be safe. The number of people counted bring critical federal funding for programs such as free and reduced lunch for children in need, affordable health care funding for families in need, and much more. Please help everyone in Elgin. Be counted. Sea contado.
Thank you, thank you. Again, we think probably one of our most important videos will be that in Spanish. We do have a large Hispanic population, a wonderfully large Hispanic population, and reaching out to them. Yeah, she also works for the schools, but she chairs our education subcommittee. We will also have an animation by the same videographer where it will walk them through, in a minute or less, the basics of the census and how it's going to work. It will not have a lot of the intricate details. It won't answer every question, but it will be very informative on how the census works. And that will be available, I think, in the not too distant future. I don't know what her timeline is, but she's working on it now. This is also, I would suggest, this is one of the things that we did in 2010. Again, getting that message out as all of the people who communicate in these communities realize it's harder and harder and it's more niche and niche to communicate. So the reason we created the world's largest census form in 2010, and that photo is being taken by a firefighter above the fire truck, was to get us from page 3 to page 1. It's creating something that's visual as opposed to all words, especially in communities where language might be a barrier is really important. This is our plan for 2020. We think we'll debuting this at the end of August. And it is the world's largest census tablet, we believe. And of course, that's English. The words over there are in English and in Spanish. We plan to accompany it with a real tablet. What we did in 2010 was our mayor actually signed the world's largest census form. I think he actually signed another one, but for us, he did sign it there. But creating visuals, I'm getting counted, photo ops, and in the language of the places or of the language and the people that you need to reach are really effective in taking it just out of words. I guess some of the statistics that have shown that if you have a picture with a newspaper article, it's 80% more read. So making sure that you have some visuals that matter, that can connect with the people that you're trying to reach is very important, and especially in communities where language is a barrier. This is our census timeline. As you can see, that was part of the handouts, and for the people online, we're going to be sharing those, if not being shared right now. What we have is all of, we're in an education phase through 2020 till January of 2020, where we'll both be in education and in implementation. But what we have, can I move? I can move, right? Yeah, okay. What we have here, and it's a work in progress, is all of our partners. Where do we have an opportunity? Where are you having an event that we can bring our world's largest census tablet or materials or a pull-up form or a banner? As you can see, this banner right here, this was in our parade. Where's an opportunity? Because the 4th of July parade is one of the first things we have over here. And is where can you start building awareness? The first thing is, there's so many people who don't know about the census. Maybe you have never heard of it, but then there's the is it safe question. So at every opportunity, we're going to the city, the library, again, being a trusted institution. This is really important for libraries to have their events as part of this because of our always present, trusted reputation. So that it's a great place to have your census. But that's how we've developed it. We're just having people fill it in. For preparing for a grant, this is some of the things that are in our grants. And we do this backwards. We say, what do we have with that form? What do we already have that we can use? What will be the cost of using? And some of these, like having those places where you can drop off materials. We ran out of materials in 2010. So we actually, Moldoff, which is one of our partners, we actually took some of their materials and reprinted something very much like theirs. They were very short, and we thought the shorter, the concise message, because when you think of how much information is out there about the census, making it attainable so that you're not working real hard, and we all know in marketing, making something very accessible for people's thoughts, and connecting with them is really important. So having a materials budget. A translation, there's going to be a lot available translated from the census, but you may, if you have certain populations, you may want to look into that for translation. We actually now serve coffee and little muffins at our meetings. As I talked to before, the people. We actually will have a part-time person that will sit in the library during our busy times in March talking about the census and why it's important to this community. Let's see. We have a tech person in the schools who will stay after events to use their computer centers. And communications, and again, we are the co-chair, Laura Valdez Wilson of the City of Elgin and myself, we chair our complete count along with Karen Fox, who has started off as our grant writer, and she's just become, she's our co-chair. We have 3 chairs then of our census committee. But so communications is part of our budget. You may not need to be that part of your cost analysis. However, we really did think that we would like to buy some airtime, and especially in those arenas that serve the people we need to reach. So pace bus signs, billboards, and just use your communication people in your library or communication experts in your communities to determine what's the best use of any communication devices. Training, we've been attending some trainings, we've had some training out. Census actually did an hour condensed training. They do a 3-hour. Again, you can do a train the trainer, but there's also the census has been really wonderful about coming out and doing some training for us as well. In 2010, I think I have that up here. Yes, you don't have to know all the answers. When we got really hard questions about how different families were residing and how portions of the year, at some point we would turn them over to a census hotline. We did as much training as we could, but at some point we would just say, at this point, it's time for you to talk to someone more expert than us. And we were very comfortable with that role. And I think the census was pretty comfortable with us doing it that way as well, that you don't have to be an expert on every little detail, because there are some very intricate questions you will get. And then implementation. This was our start. This is us in the recent 4th of July parade. It was really well received for everyone. But this was our start of actually execution to just build awareness. And that's my presentation on how you can get ready. And again, thanks to everyone for helping all of the libraries to get ready. It's been some wonderful information that's been provided and actions that have been taken by the state of Illinois.
Okay, thank you, Denise. Looking at the clock, we have about 10 minutes or so. So my colleague Margie Schmidt's in back, been watching some questions and comments roll in from our streamers, but I will start here in Burr Ridge. Anybody have any questions or comments for our panel here? And I'll just let any of you respond to just make sure your microphone's on, and we'll get through as many of these as we can. So.
Hello, this is for all of you, but particularly Denise probably. So what type of census activities did you do? Or do you guys plan on doing? Because, we want to do things like educating, but I didn't know if there was anything hands-on, because as a librarian, people like hands-on activities.
We have a wonderful arts community. We're going to be developing coloring sheets that are going to be backpacked home through our schools. We are trying to jump on to other activities that are already happening, like the 4th of July parade. Then we also gave out census fans at that point. But we do have a few, in 2010, we did have some of our own census events, but we will be, we have Lamos Expo. It's a business expo for mainly targeted to Latinos. We'll be there. So really, what we plan to do is be in the whole fabric of the community. We probably are not, we're going to have a few. We will have a kickoff in August, late August. That is just going to be, we've had Congressman Kristen Morthy out already. A number of our local representatives and congresspeople have been out. We will have more of that. But actually, being part of events where people are already coming to, that has been an effective way of getting that messaging out. And also, with that, the culture of maybe a little bit of fear, to make sure that we're in those family spaces, the safe family spaces, and just the census is part of this. So that's mainly been one of our ways, but we will be updating what we are doing, and again, that's working with all of our partners.
So in my community, coming up this coming Tuesday, we're going to have a kickoff for one of the local complete count committees. So the Chinese American population is about a quarter of my state district population, maybe upwards of 30,000 people. And within that population, we have a lot of seniors, a lot of folks whose first language is not English. And so there's a coalition of community-based organizations serving that community that has come together, and they're planning to do a kickoff on Tuesday, highlighting the special needs of this particular community and getting everybody together to be at the table, to commit to reaching out to this population. So that's just one example. And I think this kickoff is going to be based at one of the community organizations, but we also have a beautiful Chicago Public Library branch in Chinatown, and there's a nice community space, and so I think that we might have some future gatherings, meetings, events at that library as well.
And the other thing I would mention for everyone is that the Census Bureau has a number of materials and tchotchkes that they can give out. So if you're looking to put an event together, they also have a really easy toolkit that can help facilitate community conversation that you can customize per your community. The Census Bureau has a number of what are called partnership specialists that are specific to regions within our state. So if you connect with Denise or State Representative Ma or myself, we can connect you to the Bureau, who can then connect you to the specific partnership specialist and get you those materials.
And just to jump onto that, our partnership specialist in Elgin used to work at the library, so it's she knows what libraries can do.
Thank you. Can you speak more about the information being safe and how we can address our patrons' concerns about that? Like, what does that mean, your information
Sure.
is safe?
So that is the big elephant in the room right now, right? The misinformation, the disinformation, and the act of healing. But I think what's really important for communities to understand is that without a fair and accurate count, there's going to be so many consequences for us in the next decade. So the Census Bureau has what is called Title 13 that protects information from any decennial census for up to 72 years. And that is taken very seriously by the Bureau, and that they are not allowed to share that information with any other agency. That is personal household information that is going one way.
Okay, it's very similar for genealogy as well.
Correct.
So it's something we can connect those two together. Okay.
I was actually interested in the census materials in other languages. I know that online it's going to be available, I think, in 12 or 13 languages. So thinking about promotional materials, will they also be available from the census in those 12 or 13 languages?
I know there might be some in Spanish, but I can't speak to all of those 12 or 13 languages. I think asking the partnership specialist would probably be the best way to go.
Actually, if you go to the website of the Illinois Complete Count Commission, there are some materials in a number of languages, brochures, very basic brochures that have already been translated into Spanish, Chinese, I'm not sure, Polish.
I think, yeah.
So there are some resources that have been created, and then I think that the trusted messengers, the organizations that, have already started getting some funding for census outreach, and the ones that will be getting money for census outreach, I believe, a number of those organizations will probably be creating materials that are specific to their communities.
And these are like Forefront, the last Forefront meeting we went to, I think they're talking about aggregating. So the stuff that's happening in other states, I think you guys are talking about bringing those together so that maybe we aren't going to have to recreate the wheel for some of the basic census messages, because there's different communities throughout the country who are going through this.
That's actually a great point. So censuscounts.org is the national website that the Leadership Conference calls in almost every day, and calls information from across the country. And so they may have information that is in those various designated languages.
Okay, and to get to a few questions from our streamers, there were a couple questions about libraries that are interested in starting a complete count committee, but wondering who to contact, how someone could go about sort of getting that process started. So for any of you that might have...
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I think first and foremost, they can certainly reach out to the Illinois Complete Count Commission. They can connect you. You can also reach out to Forefront. We can connect you. The Regional Census Bureau has an actual training that Denise mentioned that can be 60 minutes or 3 hours long, and they're very specific to within your community. They'll come in and they'll help you think about and assess who should be at the table and how do you go about it. But the other thing that I would mention, if you want to get ahead of it, and you can Google this, is that Minnesota has a fantastic toolkit. It's like yay thick, but it's got so much information and so much customizable material that if you want to take a quick look at it and be able to kind of see how you want to start putting the skeleton of it together before you have a training, that's a really great resource.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to emphasize this ability to get ahead of it. I mean, you don't have to wait for permission or, the ability to contact the Census Bureau to allow you to have a complete count commission or a committee. You can, get that started first, reach out to people, and then, when it happens and you're able to reach the Census Bureau, you can have that additional access to resources, but, don't let those be barriers to, starting the process and taking the initiative.
And Denise is a great resource. She's put together 2 now, 2010 and 2020. And I came out for one of their preliminary meetings last year to pull their 2020 committee together. So she would be great technical assistance.
Oh, thank you. And again, using your large organizations in town would be key. Working with your city, working with your schools, and everyone else, of course, and everyone who serves those hard to count communities. But that's key, is just backwards thinking about, like, who do I need to get to? But again, everyone in your community should be on this, and to varying degrees, but reach out to also the big governments, also it's the people who are going to receive the most funding as well. So there's always that, who has the most to lose if we're not counted in our communities, who has the most to gain. But it really is, it's that person, it's that family, that's who we're serving, that's who, and again, I think you'll find, for people who are considering it, do it. I can't think of we've done a lot of valuable things at our library, and we're Lifeline, and we do some wonderful things, but this bringing that much money into our community by working together in 2010 was such a vitalizing force between all the partners and for everyone who worked on it. And again, knowing that people are cared for and that people who come into our library, have had the services they need to lead a great life. That was really important to all of us.
All right, time for just a couple more questions. Any recommendations for how libraries might be able to connect their hard-to-count populations and or also non-computer users with census workers to assist them in filling out the census?
I think one of the questions that we talked about, and again, this is not for everyone, and please jump in here, the way we do it is our library staff already help a lot of people with e-government services. So we've had one training with our staff, we'll have another training. And it's making sure, again, when the aspect of having that question on, it became a much more difficult question as to what our role would be. I think without the question, it's really what so many library staff do already in assisting, but I think I would encourage people to get the census folks out. Also, the census people talk, again, that was very well said about the lockbox of the data. They also say that too, and they'll tell you what oath they have taken and how much they will be fined if they would ever provide information to someone else. And I think I asked that question, has there ever been a breach of census data? And I think in real time, I don't think that's ever occurred. But it's one thing for us to say, it's another from a person who has taken that oath. Mm-hmm. But I would just encourage people to reach out to the census to do the training.
And I would say another idea would be to perhaps, direct the library staff to focus on a particular hard-to-count population within a given time period. So, during the month of February, ask every, homeless person that uses the library if, they have a way to fill out the census and how they could, how the library staff might be able to help, or the senior population, or something like that, so that there are directed efforts for particular hard to count communities.
Yeah. And we go into our policy on how much we help with e-government. We just have census follow our policies on how much we help.
Question. Question. Obviously, doing it online is different than doing it in the past on paper. Is there going to be tutorials that we can refer to our staff so they know, okay, you're going to need to code in this with the patron? These are the types of questions. How do they go through this whole process?
And that's an excellent question. So the Census Bureau actually, that will go through that with you in the training, but you can report 3 ways for the 2020 census. First will be the phone, and you will receive 5 reminders. I say reminders, but 5 points of contact, right? The actual postcard, so everybody that is registered, right, with an address will be receiving a postcard per household that will have a specific URL for your household. That is what you will use whether you go on your phone or you go to the library and use a laptop or a tablet. You'll go in and that will designate your specific way of reporting. Now, if you haven't reported by, I want to say, end of March, there'll be another reminder that goes out because there'll be a grace period. You can actually self-report anywhere from mid-March to April 3rd, I think, this time around, without getting reminders. Then you'll get another reminder in the mail, right? And then you'll get a third reminder in late April. And then for folks that have responded by then, they won't receive any more touch points, but others will. So I think the 4th reminder, which will go out in early May, some families will actually receive a paper copy, which will be the second way to self-report. But it's a sampling. That's not going to be everybody. You may be able to maybe ask for a paper copy, but I don't have guidance on that just yet. And the Census Bureau will provide more of that technical assistance as we get closer to the end of the year. But the 3rd way to report will be via telephone. And I think, as that gentleman mentioned over there, that will be available in 12 or 13 languages for people to be able to call and self-report. So that's another great way for libraries, that if you've got telephones that you can provide for people to call in, that if they want to come in and if you want to have office hours to call in, and the way to call in will be with your personal code. But the other thing I wanted to touch upon was Representative Ma mentioned that she's got great library community space in her district. And I think this is where the partnership of local count committees with the libraries is integral. Because if you want to bring in and have community conversations, if you want to bring in elected officials, if you want to bring in community leaders like MALDEF, that is a real leader in this space, particularly for the Latino community, right? This is your opportunity to bring people together in a trusted community space and congregate with these various hard-to-count populations. And we've got time. And if you start doing these monthly and you do them anywhere between now and even March, that will be really important and a really great way to educate. And the other thing I wanted to mention, which I didn't get a chance to mention before, is that we're also going to be amidst our Illinois primary election season in March. So there's going to be a lot of information out there for GOTV as well as GOTC. So if there is a way that you can even connect the two, right, whereas people are going out and doing get out the vote efforts, and you want to say, and hey, remember, look for your postcard. There's also going to be our census count in this spring. Really great way to get the information out together, because there's going to be so much information overload come spring.
Mm-hmm.
We will do one more, and then we will have to wrap up here.
Okay, thanks so much for coming out today. We really appreciate it. One of my questions is for the hard-to-reach populations who do not have a fixed address. So if everyone theoretically is being mailed a card with a unique code on it, but let's say I have a sizable population that comes in who is transient or doesn't have permanent housing, and they may be bouncing back between family members, between weekly hotels, something along those lines, and they do not have a code. So what are we doing? Are we sending them to the phone? Do we have extra cards that we can print off and provide for them? What is the method for that?
So it's a little bit of that's a little bit of a complicated question. But what they do is they know for certain populations, like the seniors, the homeless, right, the folks that are incarcerated, and students that live in dorms, that they will be counted differently. They will be counted under what is called GQ, group quarters, and that process is different, and it's started by the Bureau much earlier. So it'll be like, I think, February when that starts. But for folks that are transient, for millennials that are in any given part of the country in any given day,
Native Americans, I think,
or Native Americans, it's where you are on April 1st, right? So if you are in your aunt's home, then your aunt will account for you. That's kind of the rule of thumb. For folks that are living in a hotel, now I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if you guys do, but I would have to probably ask about that one.
Okay, because that's just the follow-up, because I know that we're pushing the cards, and that's great for everyone who has a home address.
Yeah.
But we're looking at sometimes our most vulnerable populations, and if we don't have the ability to print them off a card, will there be a solid answer to have a telephone or something along those lines made available for them from some time to some time?
There are going to be census takers who work for the Census Bureau who are physically going out to do the count on Census Day.
So there are what is called the non-response follow-up, so that when there are these folks that kind of fall out of pocket that they can account for during the census count period, they will follow up. They will go to hotels, they will go to homeless shelters, they will go to families' homes, right? For folks that haven't self-reported, because they've got information, right, that has come in real time, as Denise mentioned, that then you will be able to say, okay, 73% in Elgin, we're all at the 73% mark. Where are those pockets? And then based off of that, they'll go down and look at it through the Roam tool and the SUNY map and look by block to see, okay, where are those designated pockets? And then these folks, these census takers, which are called enumerators, will come out, and there will be a 3-month period where they do this non-response follow-up.
And we do have a census person that is in charge of counting homeless population, someone who's designated. We were at one of the trainings in Algonquin where they were talking about, I'm the specialist in that area. And they are taken, I think they take those before the regular census. They will be dealing with those kind of populations. I think it starts with a Native American population in Alaska, and I think that's, like you said, in February.
Yeah,
it's
or
very
even
early.
sooner.
But they really do have a good sense for all the work that they've done beforehand as where the homeless populations are, and they will be enumerated, or they will be counted differently.
Now, what I will say is that the millennial population, the population that's really transient, will be a little more difficult because they don't necessarily check their mail on a regular basis, right? So I think this is where social media strategy is so important to be able to get people to understand that they need to check their mail.
Yeah, because I have a follow-up to that. I apologize, because we're hosting the a census representative out at our library in November, but we're live streaming it, and then we have the social media, we have the contract to have that transmitted and up for our census town hall through August. So that's how we're sharing it, and it didn't cost us anything to do that. But that's something that we're doing where people can ask questions and they can answer them. We have the links to it all, and then it's shared consistently and is up consistently. So even though people can't make a one-off program, that's how we've been able to make sure it lives in perpetuity at least through August.
So this is a really basic question, but being a librarian and where everybody comes for answers, what happens if they lose their card? They're going to come to the library and say, I need my number. Or
Well,
my
they'll get a
access
reminder. There'll be about 5 of those postcards that'll be going out.
But is there a way that we will be able to look it up for or access it? No. I don't
think so.
See,
Because that's what they're going to say. I didn't get my card. What do I do? And I've got them there ready to do it.
So what the census is looking at right now are what are called assistance centers. So very much like what Denise mentioned, the hotline. I'm not certain if they will have a hotline this time with their preparations and the stalling of preparation. We're working really hard in the advocate field to get these technical assistance centers up. So those would be questions that you would probably send them in that direction.
because it's going to happen.
I know.
Guarantee. To send them away and say, sorry, you'll have to wait 2 more weeks until you get another reminder. They will not.
That's where we'll have those technical assistance centers.
All right, well, these are all really good questions and comments, but we are running a little over. So please help me thank Representative Ma and Anita and Denise for being here. We will share out with all of you here, with all of our streamers, the link to the recording, of course, and a copy of those handouts that Denise sent with. For those of you here in Burr Ridge that are really itching to keep talking about census stuff, we'll shift in meeting room B. We're going to have some conversation. Ashley Johnson is here from Vernon Area Public Library, who's done a lot of work around the census as well. But again, it's great that you're here. Thanks for your participation, your input, and go forth and do great census things.